I'm still reeling from this presentation, so I'm not very clear in my mind. But I will do my best. And first of all, I wish to thank the David Prize and all the wonderful colleagues that I've met here. And maybe also my friends from the Ummelfahren Art Gallery, with whom I've done some more history work, and with whom I hope to continue in the near future. I stumbled into oral history at a time when there was a fierce debate on oral sources among historians, of which I was blissfully unaware. And the debate was, can we believe oral sources? Are they reliable? Can we believe the memory of old people? Doesn't memory deteriorate with time? Can we think that individuals can be represented? How representative is one person's testimony? And this was a very much a defensive attitude from some parts of the conservative parts of the historical establishment. But it was an important discussion, because on the other side, the burgeoning world of oral history was claiming that how can you do history of the present time without recognizing that people participated in it, that we have first-hand testimony, that we had direct experience that we can access through the, for some reason, I found myself teaching literature. And as a political activist, I was going around the countryside and the industrial neighborhoods in Rome and nearby towns, collecting working class folk songs, partisan songs, and then at one point I realized, number one, many of the singers were more interested in telling me the stories that went with the songs than in singing the songs themselves. Number two, the stories were all wrong. And so, had I been a professional historian, I might have said, this is evidence that you cannot rely on all sources, you can't count on them. Coming from the world of literature, I was, in literature, you don't throw away a good story just because it isn't true. What you do is you ask what it means. Why is this happening? Why are the people in the town where I grew up telling the story of the iconic martyr of the working class struggles in Delhi, who was killed by the police in 1949? Why is everybody telling that he was killed in 1953? What happens? What does it mean? And so, and this generated a number of questions. Number one was, what do we mean by memory? And a conventional approach to memory is a storehouse of information. You have an experience, you remember it, and then as time goes by, it disappears. It frays, and I prefer to think not so much in terms of a noun, memory, as in terms of a verb, remembering. Because I think memory is a work that we do. Is a process of creating relationships and creating meaning. So one of the things that happened around the late 70s was that we began to turn around the objections that were being raised towards oral sources, which was, of course, a distance in time. We are collecting stories from World War II, from the strikes of the 1930s, and we're collecting them in 2015. What happens in the middle? And And we realized then that we had a twofold kind of document. On the one hand, a document about the past, but on the other hand, a document of the present, because the story is being told now. And so what we get is what people remember now and what the past means now. And it's all about relationship, a relationship between the present and the past, and the meaning of what of the past in the present. So that in a way memory is a constant work of generating and retrieving meaning. And meaning changes as the present changes, as the rememberer, the person who remembers changes. But as Professor Brown just told us, the past does not go away. It just changes in our minds and in the way we deal with it, in what it means to us. Which brings in, of course, not just the question of how accurate the recollection is, which most of the time it is, but also the elements of imagination, of desire, of dreaming that break into this process of creation of meaning. And so that all the false narratives, all the errors, all the myths, they become historical facts per se. We have two. If somebody tells us a story about a strike in 1953, today we have two events. One is the strike of 1953. The other is a telling of the strike today. And the relationship between these two events is what we're working on. In a way, what we do is the work of the regular, quote-unquote, regular historian. I still think of oral history is some kind of barefoot historical work that only thanks to Dante Price is becoming respectable today. But you do the regular, you try to find out what happened. And I'm pretty sure that in many cases you have a plausible idea of what actually happened. Then you do the work of the anthropologists. You try to find out what is on people's minds. What are the beliefs? What are the meanings? And then you do the work of the oral historian, which is to connect history and to navigate the in-between between these two works. So this whole work is a work of relationships, and the basic relationship that we start with is the presence of the past in the presence through the fact that we remember. Then the other thing, the other objection, how do you collect these things? How do you do it? Well, basically, you knock on people's doors, or you call people on the phone, or you email people, and you ask them if they're willing to do an interview. And 99.9% of the time people are pleased, because we all love to talk about ourselves. And here comes this professional listener, and he says, "Would you please talk about yourself?" And of course, it happens. But then, aren't we interfering by just by being there with the authenticity of the experience? And one of the first things that I've learned is there's no such thing as the authenticity. It's always some kind of construction of some work that you do. And in the case of the interview, number one, the word interview does not mean that there is an object that's being interviewed, that's being observed by a subject. But there are two subjects that are viewing each other. It's an interview. So the document you get is a very impure document because it's generated by the relationship that the person you talk to has with you as an interviewer, with who you are. So with how you present yourself. So in a way, this is the most complicated and the most fascinating element of doing this kind of work, because it's so mutable, it's so ungraspable, it's always unfinished, it's always in process, and it's always dialogue. So a little story, you spend your life listening to stories and it's catching. And the little story is, I was starting this project on the Kentucky coal miners, and the first interview I did was with a family, with an African American family in Lexington, Kentucky. And I had never really interviewed African American people before, even though I've been teaching African American literature. So I was doubly, not embarrassed, but, well, yes, embarrassed. To make a very long story a little bit shorter, the lady starts talking, and she goes in rounds, and she says, first she tells me, the commonplace things about civil rights and about unity, black and white, and then she raises the stakes, and she says, well, some of the things in the civil rights movement we didn't really appreciate, like the closing down of black schools. And then she keeps going around and she signals, and I'll tell you, and it always means that she's raising the stakes. And then one point she says, and I'll tell you, my parents, I wish I had thought of bringing the tape with me. Their grandparents, they were slaves. They were the daughters of slaves. Number one, where is the information here? The information is not in the fact that this African American lady in Kentucky had slave grandparents. All black people in the South had slave grandparents. That's not the information. The information is in how hard it is for her to utter that word. So, first of all, when we talk about oral history, we're also talking about language, about the fact that you don't have access to the experience per se. You have access to the way in which the experience is couched into words, into language, into narrative. And here, the huge difficulty that she has in saying this tells you a great deal about the meaning of that past slavery in the present of the civil rights and the union movements. So the information is there in the start, in the hesitation, in the false start, and which needs a linguistic analysis, narrative analysis, central to this book. The other thing is the silence. The silence. She will tell us what stories were handed down in her family. And silences are a huge part of memory. There are things that are unspeakable. And in many ways, one of the things that you must learn to do is respect the unspeakability. And this, of course, another little story, which I hadn't planned, which was not in my and the story is, I am talking to Mr. Piero Terracina. Mr. Piero Terracina is the voice of the Shoah survivors. An immensely wonderful person. And he talks about the moment in which they were arrested, taken to the jail, held with their hands. He and his brothers and his father held with their hands against the wall and told not to speak. And he said, my father managed to say a few words. And he said, whatever happens, do not lose your self-respect. Then he says, this, however, proved impossible. Now, do you ask him why? Or do you say no? Or do you keep quiet and you respect the silence? Because this is one of the key elements in a relationship between the interviewer and the interviewed is mutual respect. It's good manners. It's accepting the fact that the narrator has control over what can be said and what cannot be said. And I hate those people who think that they're good interviewers because they get people to say things that they would not be willing to say. This is offensive. Anyway, and the lady goes on, and she says, but, so they've told me stories in the family, but because, because of what they told me, it puts something in my heart. And even though no white person has done anything to me, because you're white, I don't trust you. So that was a great moment of decision for me. Is she talking in general, present company not included, I trust, or is she talking to me something about baby? And it's my choice, and my choice is she's talking to me. She's talking to me because all of history is about difference. It's about, you don't talk to people like you. You talk to people who are not like you. So, she's a woman and I'm a man. She's American or Italian. She's working class, I'm middle class. She's Baptist, I'm a Latin Catholic. She's black and I'm white. And she's older. I mean, all the possible differences are there. And she is talking across these differences. And the word dialogue means exactly this, talking across. So she cannot trust me, but she spends 2 hours talking to me to explain to me, by telling me stories, why she cannot trust me. So what makes the interview possible is the fact that we had things in common, like common friends, like her husband's first question on the tape, I'm not the first voice. Her husband is the first voice. And the first question is asked by him. And he asks me, are you in the United Mine Workers? She can't see. And I say, well, no, but I do have the union, the teachers' union card back home, which is not exactly the same as the union. But, they want to know who we are. They want to know who we are. The mythical fly on the wall of traditional fieldwork sociology. Well, number one, if I see a fly on the wall, my instinct is just washing. Number two, if there's a fly in the room, this means something about the atmosphere of the room. So I might as well just be visible because I'm creating that narrative. I'm the one for whom the story is being told. And the other question that the lady raised was, can I trust myself? Because she says, I don't trust you. What does this mean? And basically it means if the color of your skin becomes a matter of life and death, which side would I be? Can I trust myself to do the right thing? And the next thing was, if I had been a school student in a school in Rome in 1938, and suddenly the kid sitting next to me disappeared, could I have trusted myself to do the right thing? So the challenge is, can we trust ourselves in the face of difference, in the face of otherness? And this was the greatest lesson I've learned, which means that, of course, we're after facts. And she told us a number of very exact events and precisely recorded. But we're after relationships, meanings, because this is basically what the encounter is about. And then there are many other things. Of course, one other relationship. So, this is a relationship between cultures. And one other relationship has to do with the fact that why are you doing this interview anyway? Why are you doing this? Basically, you're doing this because the other person knows things that you don't know. So you may be this big professor, and the person you're talking to may be illiterate, but that person has a knowledge. So it's a learning situation. It's a learning situation. And I remember very well this lady in Kentucky telling me, look, because I asked her, why are people talking to me? And she says, well, number one, you're not from New York, which means you're not from the places from which we'd be stereotyped, and that's why. If you were a coal miner from Wales and you came here and talked to us about mine safety, people would listen to you because you had something to teach us. But you're only trying to gather a little knowledge. People are happy to help you. Which means that my contribution was my ignorance. The fact that I didn't know everything. I knew just enough to be able to understand what people told me. I knew the background, I knew the history, but I didn't know the person. I didn't know their lives. I didn't know the details of their work. I didn't know what it was like to work in a coal mine. So it was my ignorance and my willingness to learn that made it possible for us to have this insight. And I would like to maybe go toward the end of this conversation with another little story. And number one, when you talk to people, you have an agenda. There are things that you want to know, or there are things that you think you want to know. But you're giving this person time to talk about things that they want to talk about. And so you have like these two agendas that are only partially overlapping. And some of the greatest moments are when you discover that there are things that you didn't even know you wanted to know that the person tells you about. So I'm starting on my first real oral history project, which is trying to figure out what happened in Delhi between 1949 and 1953. Why? And I do my first interview with a steel worker, and then his wife says, I have a story to tell. And remember, my initial project was I wanted to write a book on the labor struggles in Delhi between 1949 and 1953. And she says, my great-grandfather fought with Garibaldi. And so what do? You say, well, that sounds like that's not part of my period. Fought with Garibaldi. And the day he married, he took his bride home and said, I'm going out to buy lunch. Locked her in, went out to buy lunch, and just then Garibaldi was marching by with his troop. And he couldn't resist it. He joined Garibaldi. He went south. He liberated Italy. He came back 4 years later, and so his wife had probably found ways of getting out of the house. And then I started discovering that there were a number of narratives about Garibaldi, about the war of independence, nation building, and they were all family narratives. And they all began with the hero breaking with the family. There were all stories of people leaving the family behind, being disinherited by the family for joining Garibaldi. Because before Garibaldi won, he was a bandit. He had long hair. He was on the road. I mean, these were hippies in the 60s. And so you have this incredible contradiction of stories that are family pride. My ancestor was Garibaldi, and family shame, because my ancestor went to jail for being with Garibaldi, but because my ancestor was disinherited by the family. And this tells you a great deal about what we do with memory. Because we tend to think of memory, and sometimes it's good, as something that makes us feel good. How much we suffered, how much we struggled, how badly we were treated. Uh, I don't think this is the most important contribution that memory can give us. I think at least part of what memory is about is to hurt us, to make us aware of what we would like to forget. Because we forget for two reasons. One is because things don't mean anything anymore. And the other is because there are things that mean too much and that we do not dare face. And the history of nation building is imbued with this kind of thing. The Italian resistance, the glorious Italian resistance, of which I'm a child. But the glorious Italian resistance was also about killing. And we remember that. The Italian War of Independence was about killing, was about betrayal. How are nations built? Against who we build our nations? And this, I think, is one of the facts about it. Memory hurts. Memory brings dead things back to life. And as the great African-American writer Toni Morrison said, anything dead coming back to life hurts. So where does it hurt? And when it begins to hurt, I think that we're doing our job. Because ultimately this is a task of intellectuals, to go against the grain, to turn the established narratives of evidence and question them. And one of the great things about oral history is precisely that individuals are influenced by the official narratives, but they also have their own memories, and they don't always coincide. They don't always jive. And this noise, this friction between what people are told that they should remember, what people do remember, and what people try not to remember, and what people are told they should not remember. All this friction is, I think, the generator, the motive that keeps sending us back to try to find out what the past means today.